Attacked by a Mountain Grizzly, magazine article by Kathy Cook. Veering off the Trans-Canada Highway, Anne Quarterman took her four-wheel drive Ford Ranger onto a bumpy logging road into the mountains near Revelstoke in southeastern British Columbia. She followed the road for 12 kilometers before reaching the Wilderness Trail, where she and friend Christine Bilikowski planned to hike. Anne, at 28, an outdoor enthusiast and expert skier, had applied for a cook's job Lodge High in Selkirk Mountains. Wanting to get to know the area, she decided to hike to her interview on that rainy morning of October 1st of 1994, rather than take a usual helicopter ride in. Christine, 25, had come along for the adventure. It was 9 a.m. when the two women grabbed their packs from their back of the truck for the 6-hour hike. Anne, a robust 175 centimeter tall, with shoulder-length brown hair and a bright smile, took a look at the hand-drawn map of the trail. It was 15 kilometers to the Selkirk Mountain Experience Lodge, located at the other side of the glacier at an altitude of 2,000 meters. Anne pulled a can of bear repellent out of her pack and strapped it to a holster on her hip. She often carried it with her, especially when venturing into areas where bears were known to feed. Just in case, she said, smiling at Christine. The two had met the year before when Anne worked as a cook and Christine as a waitress at the hotel in the mountain town of Rossland. Christine, a small, fair-skinned woman with long blonde hair, had recently arrived from Toronto and was looking for a great skiing. Anne had moved from Rossland from Quebec a few years earlier and was happy to find a new ski partner in Christine, and they became fast friends. The hike began casually as a slow uphill stroll through the coniferous mountain forest. The two women appeared to be the only women on the trail, or only people on the trail. But Christine, spotting an unsightly plastic grocery bag hanging from a tree, knew others had been around. I wish people would show more respect for nature, she thought disgustedly. And soon the trail narrowed into a thin, overgrown path that led the two women into a steep and rocky terrain. They crawled over large rocks and jumped across shallow creeks, taking particular care to keep constant the pace of conversation, warning any bears of their presence. 3 hours into the grueling hike, at an altitude just over 800 meters, they climbed over a ridge and came out above the tree line into an alpine meadow. Anne gazed at the valley below, which, despite a low-lying fog, glowed with the colors of autumn. The trail curved around, descended towards the meadow, and then continued up the mountain. Anne and Christine sauntered along the path for a few moments, still appreciating the view. Then Anne looked down into the meadow again and suddenly stopped. Look, Christine, 3 bears. Below them, about 300 meters away, they saw a female grizzly with her 2 cubs. Neither woman was frightened. Both had seen bears many times. They knew that if they didn't startle them, they should be safe. Then they realized the bears were running towards them. Christine glanced nervously at Anne. They're so far away, they have to be running after something else, Anne thought. But the mother, leaving her cubs behind, kept moving in their direction. Still not sure if they were in any real danger, Anne thought, this has got to be a false charge. Simultaneously, Christine and Anne began yelling, trying to intimidate the bear, but the mother grizzly kept coming. With no trees to climb, panic welled up inside of Christine, and she turned and started running. Christine, don't run, Anne yelled, thinking that this would make the bear even more inclined to attack. Christine slowed down to a walk, and with racing hearts, both women walked down a bank out of the sight of the grizzly. The bear mace, Anne remembered. She unlatched it from its holster and pulled the safety clip out. She still didn't believe the bear would attack. She knew from living in an area with a dense bear population that they often make charges to scare intruders. She looked up and waited to see if the bear would appear. Oh, please be gone, she thought desperately. Just then, the head of the grizzly popped over the ridge, 5 meters away. Anne aimed the can at the approaching animal. I have just one chance to do this right. 2 meters from her, the grizzly rose up on its hind legs, towering over her. Their eyes locked, and for a moment Anne froze, mesmerized by the fierce black stare. Then she pressed the trigger, unleashing the burning red spray into the bear's face. Reeling in pain, the grizzly dropped to the ground and ran past her. Anne was relieved, but then she remembered Christine wasn't carrying any spray, and she turned around to see what had befallen her friend. Gripped by fear, Christine watched as the bear now ran towards her. Before she could react, it clenched her left arm and began savagely thrashing her back and forth. While the 225-kilogram beast dragged her along the ground, Christine's only thoughts were of her family and how upsetting the news of her death would be. Despite the violence of the attack on her friend, Anne sprang into action, running over to mace the bear a second time. In a rage, the bear now threw Christine into some bushes and lunged at Anne. She tried the spray again, but the can was empty. Anne dropped it and turned away in horror, her right arm still outstretched. I must be dreaming, she thought. Biting into her arm, the grizzly knocked Anne over, and together they rolled down the embankment. She screamed as she felt her arm was being ripped open. Her only thoughts was, please kill me quickly. But then her mind cleared. Everything she had read about bears came flooding back. It was useless to try to defend herself. I have to play dead. Pulling her ravaged arm free from the grizzly's mouth, Anne rolled onto her stomach. In response, the grizzly bit into her side and flipped her back and forth so that her stomach was again exposed. Summoning all her strength, Anne again flipped herself onto her stomach. She put her hands behind her neck and lay still. The grizzly bit and clawed into the backpack Anne was still wearing. Then it moved onto her head. Although she had a baseball cap and hood on, the bear managed to peel a large chunk of flesh away from her head. Curiously, Anne felt no pain as she was scalped in one quick swipe. Crouched in the bushes, Christine watched, and she knew she would be next. She looked helplessly around at the meadow. This is where I'm going to die. And suddenly, she was jerked back to reality. I can't stand by and watch Anne be mauled to death. Freeing herself from her backpack, Christine strode towards her friend and the grizzly. If I'm going to die, I'm going to put up a fight. I'm coming, Anne, she yelled. And doing the only thing she could think of, she gave the bear's head a kick and then fell backwards. Almost immediately, the grizzly was on top of her, trying to bite her neck. Christine fought back, legs flailing, and she managed to land a solid kick on the animal's nose. The grizzly recoiled and moved to Christine's side, sinking its teeth deep into her hip, just missing the femoral artery. But then all of a sudden, it released its grip, and with its final huff, ran behind some shrubs and downhill, out of sight. With adrenaline still pumping, Christine got up and approached Anne. Her friend lay still and silent, her clothing torn and soaked in blood. Is it gone? Anna asked, lifting her head slowly. Christine winced. She watched a chunk of Anne's scalp flap up and fall back into place on her blood-soaked head. Let's get out of here before it comes back, Christine said. No, we need to bandage ourselves up first. Painfully, she reached into her pack, grabbing a shirt, and tied it and tried to wrap it around her head. I can't use my right arm, she said. Can you help me? Using one arm each, the two women managed to wrap Anne's head and tie other clothing around their injured arms. It was drizzling, and with the temperature just above freezing, the rain would likely turn to snow later in the day. Wet already, badly injured, and losing blood, the two women had to make the 3-hour trek back to their vehicle before the afternoon light faded. A night in the wilderness could prove to be fatal. Their slow descent from the mountain drained what little energy they had. On one hill, Anne lost her footing and slipped down over the rocky terrain. Her head bandage fell off, but she got back up to her feet and, with Christine's help, retied her bandages. They kept chatting and singing as to not surprise the bear again. Anne continued to weaken step by step, and her spirits sank after every turn when the truck still was not in sight. I don't think I can make it, she said faintly. You've been a great friend, Chris. If I don't make it, tell my sister and her family in Rossland that I love them. Keep going, urged Christine, but she had no idea where they were going. But she said, we're almost there. The truck's just a couple more bends ahead. I recognize this place. And as they trudged over the next few kilometers, Anne's pace got even slower. Christine still had no idea how far they had to go. Then at last she saw the plastic bag hanging from the tree that had so disgusted her at the beginning of their hike that morning. They really were almost there. They had one last hill to climb. Her body well past exhaustion, Anne's heart pounded as she struggled to force one foot in front of the other. Finally, their truck was in sight. As Anne bent over to unlock the door, a large pool of blood that had collected in her raincoat splashed to the ground. Seeing that, she passed her keys to Christine. Christine pulled herself slowly into the driver's seat, put the key into the ignition, and froze. In shock, she couldn't remember how to drive. So Anne, using her left arm, changed the gears, while Christine steered the truck down the mountains road's dangerous switchbacks with her good right arm. Just before the highway junction, they came upon a man cutting wood. "We've just been attacked by a grizzly bear," Christine called out. "Could you take us to the hospital?" The man's face turned ashen when he looked at the blood-soaked women. "There's a road crew working just ahead," he said. "They're sure to have a radio. I'll lead you to them." Sandy Patterson was directing traffic when a logger ran up to the road towards her, followed by a truck. "You've got to help," he yelled. "I've got 2 women here who've been attacked by a grizzly." Grabbing a co-worker who had first aid training, Patterson approached the 2 shaking women. But upon seeing them, she feared that they might die from shock, and she ran back to her radio and called for an ambulance. In 20 minutes, Anne and Christine were on their way to Queen Victoria Hospital in Revelstoke. They each required some 50 stitches. While in hospital, Anne and Christine were interviewed by a wildlife control officer. They agreed that the mother bear should not be put down. "She was just doing what she should naturally do," said Christine. "We were intruders." Except for a 5-centimeter scar beside her left eye, most of Anne's scars are hidden under her hairline. Physiotherapy has helped to restore the use of her left arm, although she did lose some muscle tissue. Christine is fully recovered except for some scars on her arms, hips, and legs. More than a year after their near-fatal ordeal, Anne and Christine reunite for another outdoor adventure, a week-long ski holiday in BC's Kokanee Glacier Provincial Park. "This time there was no hiking," says Anne with a smile. Now you're going to work on the questions. For number 1, it says responding to the article. You're going to do A, B, C, D, and E. Definitely focus on D, because that leads back into our unit.